Week 2 is officially underway as we see the Buffalo Bills take down the Miami Dolphins on Thursday Night Football. Today, I bring forth my wide receiver rankings going into Week 2 of fantasy football. Hopefully, you started 1-0, but if not, I got you covered with my locked-in wide receiver 1s, my wide receiver 2s, my wide receiver 3s, and my favorite flex plays this week. We go through about 36 wide receivers if you're new to the channel, so if you do enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. But before we get into the tier list itself, we go to the will they play tier. Starting off with Jameson Williams, he was limited in practice in both Wednesday and Thursday. He picked up an ankle injury in the Sunday Night Football win against the Los Angeles Rams. Again, something to monitor. We want to see if he practices on Friday. Does look like he is set to play against Tampa Bay, but if you do have Jameson Williams, do monitor his practice status going into Friday. Higgins, wide receiver of the Cincinnati Bengals, did miss Week 1 with a hamstring issue. Does sound like he is set to miss in Week 2. If he does play, I don't want to put him in my lineup. I want to see how he recovers from this injury. I want to see this Bengals offense return to form. A lot of risk putting T. Higgins in your lineup, even if he does suit up. So regardless of whether he does play in this game or not, he will not be playing in your fantasy football lineup this week. Malik Neighbors, wide receiver of the New York Giants, as per Jordan Renan, who covers the New York Giants, doesn't appear to be anything serious. His leg tightened during practice. Seems to be okay. See how he feels tomorrow. Assuming he does practice today, assuming he does look fine, he is ready to be in my lineup in Week 2. A guy that I'd be comfortable starting as a top 20 play at the wide receiver position. And then finally, Keenan Allen, wide receiver of the Chicago Bears, is dealing with a heel issue that he re-aggravated on Sunday's win. It's very concerning. Again, older wide receiver coming in this offseason, apparently has been dealing with this heel issue throughout training camp, re-aggravates it on Sunday. It's scary to me. I mean, there's a real possibility that Keenan Allen is completely cooked. Despite leading the team in targets in Week 1, 11 targets, he was able to turn into 29 receiving yards. So even if he does play, if he looks like he did in Week 1 and he severely is lacking the movement ability that we saw even from last year's Keenan Allen, I do have a hard time trusting him in my lineup. So with Keenan Allen, play it by ear. If you're in a deeper league and he does end up suiting up, I don't mind putting him in one of your flexes, but he's a guy that I have wide receiver 4 level expectations for, even if he does suit up in this game. But now moving on to my top 12 wide receivers, we started off with going into the slate, my wide receivers 1 and 2 respectively, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, Tyreek Hill, very unfortunate what was able to happen to this Miami offense. Really lacking a lot of juice in this game, even prior to Tua's exit. Tyreek Hill ends up with a stat line, 3 receptions, 24 receiving yards, also adds a 12-yard rush. And we will quickly address this, hoping and praying for Tua Tagovailoa speedy recovery off of that head injury. Did not look good. Head hit the ground pretty hard. Obviously had the fencing reaction for the second time in the last 2 years. Hoping and praying for a speedy recovery from Tua Tagovailoa. CeeDee Lamb, we'll just talk about the matchup real quick. 26.5 implied home points for the Cowboys going up against the Saints this week. There is a potentially no Marshawn Lattimore in this game. Tyrann Mathieu also limited this week. This is the get-right spot for the Cowboys passing offense. Obviously very hampered by game script in Week 1, going up big at halftime, not really having to press the issue in the passing game in the second half. I do think CeeDee Lamb is set to show why he was the true 101 coming into the season. We'll move on to my wide receiver 3 with Cooper Kupp, wide receiver of the LA Rams. 23.5 implied Rams points going on the road to play the Cardinals this week. Puka Nacua, obviously big news, goes on IR on Sunday. Cooper Kupp goes back to looking like 2021 Cooper Kupp. Big time game environment for him. We trust this offense. We trust Sean McVay. And is there any role more valuable than the Cooper Kupp role in fantasy football? 21 targets in Week 1, looking like that prime Cooper Kupp. And there's no reason why he can't continue that, man. He's my wide receiver 3 on the week, and there's a very real possibility he can enter wide receiver 1 status should he build on what he showed in Week 1. We look like we're getting 2021 Cup all over again. Wide receivers 4 and 12 respectively for me are Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions and Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Big time matchup this week. Tampa Bay travels to Detroit. Detroit in this game implied for 29.5 points. Mike Evans and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers implied for 22 points, with the Detroit Lions obviously being 7.5 point favorites in this game. We'll just talk about it quickly from Amon-Ra St. Brown's perspective. Obviously, overall, this is the highest scoring game on the entire slate. Highest over-under at 51.5. This is a game we want to be targeting in DFS. If you guys are building out your game stacks, you know, your Jalen McMillan run backs, like every single player in this lineup, in this game, will have some sort of fantasy ceiling based off the game environment we're looking at here. Fast-paced teams will put up a lot of points. Monter St. Brown, obviously a tough performance in week 1. We saw Jameson Williams really take off in week 1. I do think this is the get-right spot for Monter St. Brown. The Bucs secondary is completely banged up at this point. Antoine Winfield already ruled to be doubtful for this game, and I believe it was Zion McCollum and Tyke Smith are also listed as questionable. So this was already a fast-paced game environment, high-scoring game environment, but if Tampa is going to be missing 3 of their 5 starting DBs, there is room for this Detroit Lions offense to absolutely explode in this game. On the flip side with Mike Evans, really love what I saw with new offensive coordinator Liam Cohen coming to this game. Motion rate, fast-paced offense, schemed open wide looks. We also saw Mike Evans produce 5 catches, 60 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns in week 1. High touchdown equity on this offense. Baker Mayfield literally looks like Tampa Bay's version of Jared Goff, and I do think, like I said, this will be one of the higher scoring games of the entire slate. Mike Evans, Big Papi Mike, should score a touchdown or 2 as well. Moving on to my wide receivers 5 and 7, I have A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles and Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals listed here. With A.J. Brown, obviously the Eagles implied for 26.75 home points against the Falcons this week. For Jamar Chase, 21.25 implied Bengals points going on the road to play the Kansas City Chiefs. And that is the main reason why I do prefer A.J. Brown. I think from a real-life perspective, from a talent perspective, they are very even. I think both these guys are top 5 real-life talents. And coming into the year, I did prefer Jamar Chase because I do view the Bengals, when they are operating at their full capacity, as having a higher overall offensive volume ceiling in terms of the passing game. But the Bengals offense looked discombobulated in week 1. I mean, Joe Burrow doesn't look like himself. Jamar Chase, obviously big-time holdout. T. Higgins didn't even play in this game. They did not look like themselves against the Patriots. And for me personally, again, I am confident enough to start Jamar Chase as a mid-range wide receiver 1. But when it has to come at the expense of the other elite options like A.J. Brown, I'm going to be starting A.J. Brown. I feel really good about what I saw with the Eagles offense in week 1. A.J. Brown, 33% target share in that game. I do think he is set, despite even a potential matchup against A.J. Terrell, to really perform in this game against the Falcons on Monday Night Football. It sucks for me. I do play Badaki in the Flock League, who does have A.J. Brown, but I do think we see more of what we saw in week 1, that explosive A.J. Brown and that explosive Eagles offense. Wide receiver 8, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, going on the road to play the Tennessee Titans this week. And despite a tough matchup in week 1, obviously going against arguably the best defense in the NFL with the San Francisco 49ers, we saw exactly what we needed to see from this Jets offense. This target hierarchy in this offense was consolidated down to 3 players. It was Garrett Wilson, it was Allen Lazard, and it was Breece Hall. And with Garrett Wilson, he commanded 11 targets and a 38% target share in that game. I understand. I mean, Aaron Rodgers a little rusty in that game, but I thought he moved a lot better than I expected coming into the year. And even if he's 75%, 80% of the Aaron Rodgers we saw between 2018 and 2022 with the Green Bay Packers, that is by far the best quarterback that Garrett Wilson has had in his career. Again, very consolidated situation. Tennessee Titans, solid defensive performance against the Bears, but I do think that the Jets are looking for a big-time bounce back this week, and I think Garrett Wilson will be the catalyst of that in the passing game. Wide receivers 6 and 9, respectively, for me are Deebo Samuel coming in as my wide receiver 6, and Justin Jefferson coming in as my wide receiver 9. Obviously, big-time matchup. Vikings traveling on the road to play the aforementioned San Francisco 49ers. Niners, for Deebo's sake, implied for 25.75 points, with Justin Jefferson, the Minnesota Vikings, are implied for 20.75. And Deebo is the big beneficiary of the CMC injury. Obviously, sans Jordan Mason becoming an RB1, whereas if CMC were healthy, he would be more so in the RB3, RB4, RB5 range. But with Deebo Samuel specifically, the reason why I do mention that is when CMC is out of the lineup, we do see the type of rushing usage we want to from Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, obviously a big-time constant in the passing game, but when you're combining a 32% target share along with 8 carries and a goal line touchdown in the rushing game in week 1, it's hard not to be excited about this matchup. Obviously, again, high implied total. This 49ers offense is clicking on all phases, and with Deebo Samuel, like we said, he can pay off in multiple ways. He can pay off in the rushing game. He can pay off in the receiving game, to the point where with CMC out, man, he goes from a wide receiver 2 level projection to where I have him right now as a mid-range wide receiver 1. And then my wide receiver 9 on the week, Justin Jefferson, obviously on the flip side of the matchup. I mentioned how strong this Niners defense projects, and I mean, it comes down to the fact that while this Niners defense is elite, Justin Jefferson may very well just be the best wide receiver of all time. Again, there are some concerns, obviously. Does Darnold hold up to the pressure? Does the explosive plays down the field get limited because the Niners defense aren't really prone to giving that up? We will find out a lot, but again, when you're comparing him versus the other 8 stud talent wide receivers in better matchups and better offensive game environments, I do prefer them to Justin Jefferson this week. And then we'll group these last two together because they are the big risers going into my wide receiver one territory. Rashee Rice, wide receiver of the Cincinnati Bengals, and Nico Collins, wide receiver of the Houston Texans. For Rashee Rice's sake, 26.75 implied points for the Kansas City Chiefs hosting the Bengals this week. On the flip side for Nico Collins, 26 implied Houston Texans points going up against the Chicago Bears. I mean, if you just look at their roles in this offense, you'll understand why they are big risers. Rashee Rice, 38% targets per route run, 33% target share, and a 30% air yard share in week one, according to Dwayne McFarland's utilization report. And with Nico Collins, 25% targets per route run, 26% target share, 50% share of the air yards. Obviously came down with that huge explosive play down the field, 55-yard catch in double coverage. They're just elite players and elite offenses with elite quarterbacks. That's what it comes down to for me. And as a result, they are going to be wide receiver one projections moving forward. Like I said at the top, I'm going through about my top 36 wide receivers this week. If you guys want access to all of mine and Corey's rankings, you can get it in one of two ways. The first way is if you guys go over to Underdog Fantasy, sign up and deposit $10 using code FSC, you will get access to our weekly rankings manifesto. The other way, flockfantasy.com, promo code FSC, 30% off of any site-wide package. And if you sign up today, you will also get a 7-day free trial. Both ways get you access to the weekly rankings manifesto, the most useful tool for your fantasy football season. But moving on to my high-end wide receiver twos, we start off with Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins, a guy that I had obviously ranked as my wide receiver 13 going into the game. Does play Thursday Night Football, 4 receptions, 41 yards, 8.1 PPR points. It is very unfortunate we did not see that classic high-paced, high-scoring Dolphins offense in this game. And of course, his quarterback with Tua Tagovailoa does leave the game early. So unfortunate. He was 13. We move on to wide receiver 14 here with Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers. Very pedestrian performance in week one. Obviously did not look like that prime Brandon Ayuk we were accustomed to seeing last year, but I do think this is the big bounce back spot. This is a much more ideal matchup this week in Minnesota rather than having to play a bunch of outside cover snaps against Sauce Gardner himself. Again, San Francisco implied for a ton of points in this game. Brandon Ayuk, elite talent, obviously missed a ton of camp. I think this is the game where he goes 7 catches, 115 yards, a receiving touchdown or 2, and the Niners offense looks like the best offense in the fucking league. But moving on to my wide receivers 15 and 17, we do have two players in the same Monday Night Football matchup. Devonta Smith, wide receiver of the Philadelphia Eagles, coming in at 15. Drake London, wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons, coming in as my wide receiver 17. Eagles implied for 26.75 points. Drake London and the Falcons implied for 20.25 in this matchup. And like I mentioned when I talked about A.J. Brown, the Eagles looked extremely impressive on the offensive end in week one against Green Bay. In that game, we saw some extremely positive usage for Devonta Smith. 70.7% of his sampled routes came in the slot. And as we know, Kellen Moore, big-time slot merchant in terms of an offensive play caller. We saw it with Keenan Allen last year. We've seen it with CeeDee Lamb in the past. And Devonta Smith himself is a guy that actually thrives from the slot. Career 2.48 yards per route run in routes that have come out of the slot. So if that's going to be his main role moving forward, I do think we have to be treating him as, at the very least, a high-end wide receiver 2. And if he brings a couple more good performances, I think we can even consider him in the top 12 range. That is how valuable the role is in this offense. On the flip side with Drake London, again, a guy that we cited coming into the year, high target share, high involvement player. We were quoting the offensive potential jump that they could take. Kirk Cousins obviously signed this offseason. Did not look like himself in week one, I'm not going to lie. The Achilles, I don't know what it was. He just was not moving well. He was not playing well. Obviously going to be rusty, going to have to knock back some rust, but I am a little bit concerned with Kirk Cousins' status. However, Drake London, alpha level target share. If we do see Kirk Cousins bounce back, Drake London could even be underranked at 17. Wide receiver 16 for me is DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. Only 19.5 implied points for the Bears going on the road to play the Texans on Sunday Night Football. However, DJ Moore, he's a star-level talent. They are missing their two other wide receivers in the room with Keenan Allen dealing with the heel injury and with Rome Odunze dealing with that knee injury. Does sound like both those guys are either going to be in severe question or possibly out of this game on Sunday night. With DJ Moore, like we said, this is not new to him. I mean, we saw last year him being the clear-cut alpha in a bad offensive situation with Justin Fields and no other target earners on this team last season. The only difference is that Caleb Williams, despite a bad performance in week 1, still has the upside to be that generational quarterback we pegged him as coming into the season. Yes, it was a bad first game rookie performance, but we still know the ceiling is intact with Caleb Williams. So I do have to raise DJ Moore to be a mid-range wide receiver too. But as long as Roma Dunze and Keenan Allen are out, and as long as Caleb Williams potentially shows some more growth, he could even enter that wide receiver 1 territory. I'm saying this about a lot of players, but that is how close-knit this range is. All these guys having a ton of upside on a weekly basis. That doesn't change with DJ Moore. Chris Olave, wide receiver of the New Orleans Saints, comes in as my wide receiver 18, obviously traveling on the road to play my beloved Dallas Cowboys. You see it over my shoulder right now, the jersey hanging in the back with Ezekiel Elliott, but the Saints are implied for 20.5 points, and people might look that on face value and think, 20.5, that's okay, whatever. After what the Cowboys showed in week 1 on the defensive end, 20.5 is a very respectable total for this team. And the reason why it's projected so high is that we saw a different age of the Saints offense. With Clint Kubiak coming in, obviously that San Francisco tree coming from the Shanahan system, we saw a lot of motion, we saw a lot of play action, we saw a lot of revolutionized, modern day offense, where if you're comparing that to the Pete Carmichael called Saints offenses, it is a night and day performance. I do think the Saints offense is legit. Chris Olave, despite not commanding the level of targets we were used to seeing in week 1, is still coming into the season profiled as an elite target earner going into year 3 with that breakout. Again, still not an ideal matchup. The Cowboys are obviously very good on the defensive end, but if Chris Olave gets back to that target earning ability and he's on an offense that isn't at the complete bottom of the league and in fact may even profile to be in the top half of the league, I am very intrigued with Chris Olave. I think he's one of the better buy lows in fantasy. But moving on to my low end wide receiver 2s, Chris Godwin, wide receiver of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 22 implied points, like I mentioned with Mike Evans for Tampa Bay traveling on the road to play the Lions. And I'm all in on Liam Cohn. Exactly what I need to see. The slot usage, the overall motion rate in this offense. It looked like we were watching the Tampa Bay Rams. That's basically the best way I can put it. And the guy playing the Cooper Kupp role was actually going to be Chris Godwin. So we know Mike Evans is a lot better in terms of the target competition than what we saw from Cooper Kupp in 2021. However, Mike Evans, Jalen McMillan, and Chris Godwin are all going to be able to eat in this offense. And specifically Chris Godwin, he looked the best he's had since that 2019 breakout season where he had over 1,400 yards, where he was a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy. Do I think he has a top 5 level ceiling moving forward? No. But do I think he's a strong wide receiver 2 candidate on a week-to-week basis based off the usage we saw in week 1? Absolutely. And speaking of usage in week 1, Michael Pittman Jr., wide receiver of the Indianapolis Colts, 21.75 implied Colts points going on the road to play the Packers this week. He commanded a 39% target share in week 1. That is absolutely outrageous. He didn't score a ton of fantasy points, and I think that's the main concern I have with Michael Pittman in the sense that he's just a possession chain mover on this offense. Again, gets a ton of volume, gets a ton of looks underneath, but when you have A.D. Mitchell and when you have Alec Pierce stretching the field, he's not getting those valuable down the field, high air yard level targets. So with Michael Pittman, again, very safe wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 2 projection in PPR leagues, knowing he will be heavily involved. But until we see that big play nature come back to his game, I think that's going to be the ceiling. I don't view him as a guy that can finish as the wide receiver 4 overall in the week, whereas some of the other wide receivers in this range, I absolutely do feel have that in their range of outcomes. But moving on to my wide receiver 21, we have Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals, 24.5 implied home points for the Cardinals this week going up against the Rams. And I understand there is concern, there is pessimism. We did not see Marvin Harrison Jr. look like the Marvin Harrison Jr. prospect that was the number 1 graded wide receiver in the FSC prospect model. I understand the concerns. We want to see him play better before we put him back up to the range where he was being drafted. Again, a 1-2 turn pick. Maybe in some of your leagues he fell more to the mid-second, but this was the highest drafted rookie receiver we have ever seen in fantasy football, and I still think he's that level of talent. Obviously, again, not the week 1 performance we would have wanted to see. 1 catch for 4 yards, 1.4 PPR points. But again, he's still an elite talent. He still has an opportunity to be an elite level target earner, assuming he can make that adjustment to NFL speeds. He just really looked like he couldn't process the NFL at the highest capacity in week 1. He's still the level of talent I viewed at Ohio State. Again, I am a Michigan fan, so me praising an Ohio State guy definitely does not feel good. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is special, and if you are able to get him for anything outside of top 20 price tags because people are concerned about his week 1 performance, he is going to have a bounce back performance sooner rather than later. Hopefully it's this week. I do have him at 21, but I do think that the bounce back is coming soon. Wide receiver 22, Devontae Adams of the Las Vegas Raiders. only 16.5 implied points for the Raiders this week, obviously going on the road to play the Baltimore Ravens. I get it. Like, volume is king in fantasy football, but when you're a declining player in this bad of an offense, I do have my concerns. Davante Adams, again, save for a huge target share in this game. I wouldn't be shocked if he had 10, 11, 12, even 13 targets in this game against the Ravens, given the game script we can expect going into that game. Obviously, the Ravens are going to be heavy favorites, but I'm concerned, man. Is he going to be able to score touchdowns in this game? Is he going to be able to really provide those explosive plays? This game environment is just not something I want to be attacking. Again, you have to have him in the top 24 because the volume is too good, but he's not a guy that I view as having a high ceiling. In fact, like I said with Michael Pittman Jr., I view Davante Adams in an even worse light. Receiver 23 for me is Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. Obviously, like I mentioned, big Sunday night football matchup between the Texans going to play the Chicago Bears at home this week. 26 implied points for the Texans, and I think people understand at this point, or even if they don't, I'm just going to make it clear. Nico Collins is the wide receiver one on this team based on usage like we saw in week 1. But the biggest misconception is that people automatically assume because Stephon Diggs scored the most points in this room, he is the wide receiver 2 on this team. But if you actually look at the usage, that would actually lean to Tank Dell. He out-targeted Stephon Diggs. He had 44% of the team air yards to Stephon Diggs' 4%, and Tank Dell just flat out moves better than Stephon Diggs at this point. Again, he scored both the touchdowns, so people are going to be high on Stephon Diggs, obviously big name in fantasy in the past, but Tank Dell is the wide receiver 2 for me in Houston. And again, I think we're going to be able to see it on Sunday Night Football. If Stephon Diggs doesn't punch in 2 touchdowns, I think Tank Dell is going to be the one that people will be desiring after this week. So remember I said this. You can fact check me after the week if I'm right or wrong. Leave it in the comment section. But wide receiver 24 for me this week is DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. 21 implied Seahawks points going on the road to play the Patriots this week. And I get it. Like, if you started DK Metcalf in week 1, like I told you to, I'm not going to lie, I took the L there because he got the Pat Surtain treatment. Like, Pat Surtain was the vehicle manufacturer. DK Metcalf was strapped in, seatbelt on, in the Pat Surtain vehicle because 24 of his 25 routes that he ran actually came against Pat Surtain in this game. So while he should be, facing a very good corner, obviously I do believe in Christian Gonzalez long-term, young corner, potentially taking a step up in terms of his NFL standing. Any corner you play is going to be an easier matchup than having to play against the absolute lockdown that is Pat Surtain. Again, a future Hall of Famer who's shadowing you for 99% of your reps. How do you expect to produce in fantasy? So I do feel for DK, despite Christian Gonzalez bringing a very good matchup in his own right, I think DK Metcalf is in store for a big-time bounce-back performance because there's only one place to go, and that is up after playing against Pat Surtain. But moving on to my wide receiver 3s, we start off with my wide receiver 26 this week with Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, like I mentioned before, big-time performance, big-time matchup, this week going up against the Cincinnati Bengals at home. It was the exact debut that Xavier Worthy could have possibly had. I mean, didn't have a ton of targets, didn't have a ton of usage at all 3 levels, but he had 2 touchdowns. He got the football in the end zone 2 times, and that is why we're still targeting him as a wide receiver 3. Obviously, again, we want to see better usage going forward. We want to see him upgrade from a 13% targets per route run rate, an 11% target share in this game. But at the end of the day, when you are attached to Patrick Mahomes, when you're attached to Andy Reid, and you already command a 77% route share in your first game, I want to be targeting you. Like, I understand the targets need to go up to be consistently viewed as a top 26, top 30 overall wide receiver in fantasy, but knowing the offensive insulation is this strong and knowing that he was a rookie in his first game, showing the level of efficiency that he did, I want to be targeting him. So again, wide receiver 26 may seem high based off the overall targets. I don't care, man. He can score a touchdown on any single touch. And coming in at wide receiver 26, we have Stephon Diggs of these Houston Texans. Obviously, like I mentioned with Tank Dell, home game, Sunday Night Football, going up against the Bears. There's going to be people mad in the comments. I understand there's people probably already typing right now. Stephon Diggs, do you not know he had the most points of this Houston Texans wide receiver core in week 1? He scored both the touchdowns. Like, it's Stephon Diggs. Like, this is the same guy we're getting from Buffalo. Like, no, it actually isn't. 4% of the air yards, least amount of target share on this team. It is very real that Stephon Diggs just had his best game as a Texan in his first game as a Texan. So if you do have Stephon Diggs, again, I still think given the attachment to this offense, obviously big-time insulated offense, given the fact that he does impact the intermediate level of the field that the other two don't necessarily do, I understand that. But at the same time, there's going to be people in your league valuing Stephon Diggs as a top 15 to 20 wide receiver rest of the season, and I simply don't view that to be the case. Again, I think he is the clear wide receiver 3 on this team. So if you do have a potential sell-high window going into Sunday, or if you're not able to sell him on Sunday and he does have a good game, it's going to be after Sunday, because point blank simple, you are not going to be able to continually outproduce Tank Dell on the level of usage that they are getting respectively. Receiver 27 for me is Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns, 19.25 implied Browns points this week going up against the Jags. There's two ways to look at this. I don't know if 27 is too high or too low, but it felt like the nice medium spot for both these perspectives. The first perspective, glass half full, Amari Cooper, alpha level target earner, David Njoku not being in this offense, there's a very real possibility he is in the double digits for targets earned in this game. And I fully understand that. That is a very real possibility. On the flip side, though, if you're looking at it at the glass half empty perspective, Amari Cooper is in a terrible offensive situation. Deshaun Watson looked completely inept going up against the Cowboys in week 1. And like we said, this is a very low implied total for this team. So I don't know which perspective is going to be the right one. Again, 27 feels like a good spot to be in the middle, because the ceiling is there for Amari Cooper to be the alpha level target earner and Deshaun Watson to look better when he's not playing against arguably a top 3 defense in the league. But at the same time, if this offense continues to struggle, Amari Cooper is going to be not useless for fantasy, but more so in that wide receiver 33, 34, 35 range moving forward. Wide receiver 28 for me is Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. 25 implied points going to play the Raiders at home this week. And this one could bite me, but until we see the down the field usage for Zay Flowers, I do have to view him as a mid-range wide receiver 3. 23% of the targets in a very vanilla offense in week 1. The Ravens offensive line was a mess. They weren't stretching the ball down the field overall in terms of the game plan. I am a little bit concerned that if Zay Flowers doesn't have that downfield third level usage that we want to see, and going up against a Vegas D that is a complete run funnel unit, again, if you have Derrick Henry, by the way, this is a great smash spot for him this week. I'm concerned for Zay Flowers. So overall, again, there's a very real possibility the Ravens get up early, start smashing the football, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson contributing in the rushing game, that Zay Flowers has another line similar to last week where it's 7 catches for 53 receiving yards. And if he doesn't score a touchdown at that point, you're looking at exactly this, a wide receiver 3. And wide receiver 29 on the week, already aged wrong. I'm not going to lie. I apologize to all of you who were in the Thursday live stream that I told to start Keon Coleman, because I got to take the L here. If you're watching this right now, comment Danny takes the L on Keon Coleman, because that's exactly what I'm doing here. He led the Bills in terms of routes. He led the Bills in terms of targets in week 1. But that didn't matter because he just wanted to produce a goose egg for me, right? 0 points. Unbelievable. Like, I don't know what to make of this. It's good process, trusting the Bills offense, especially the number 1 wide receiver based off usage in week 1. And for a raw rookie wide receiver, seeing that type of usage in week 1 showed me he was going to be able to produce in week 2. Guess I was wrong. And then closing off this range, we have my wide receiver 30 on the week with Brandon Cooks of the Dallas Cowboys. He's actually going to be my start of the week this week. 26.5 implied Cowboys points at home. This is the biggest get-right spot for the Cowboys passing game that I have seen. Because, like I mentioned with CeeDee Lamb, Marshawn Lattimore already pretty much ruled out of this game, has not practiced all week. Would be very surprised if he ends up suiting up in this game. And, of course, Tyrann Mathieu, both with DNPs and limited participants throughout the week this week for the Saints defense. The Saints defense is missing arguably their 2 best secondary players in this game. Like I said with the Cowboys offense, their passing offense in the first half against the Browns was actually moving the ball down the field, but they were victims of game script in that game. I think going into this week, again, higher implied over-under at 46.5, 6.5 point home favorites in this game. I do think we expect to see Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and especially Brandon Cooks with no Jake Ferguson producing in a big way this week. He's my start of the week, top 30. Again, if you have Brandon Cooks, again, normally a guy that'd be in that wide receiver 40 to 45 range, but with no Jake Ferguson on the field, I think he's ready to explode. Wide receiver 31, I have George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers, 19.5 implied Steelers points this week on the road against Denver. Any lower would be disrespectful for George Pickens. I do think he's a very good talent, alpha level target earner on this team, but I am concerned. Justin Fields is starting this game. They do have a low implied total, and like I mentioned with DK Metcalf, I don't want my wide receivers getting the Pat Surtain treatment, and that's very well on the docket for this week. Pat Surtain, in my opinion, is the best cornerback in the NFL, and as good as George Pickens is, it will be tough to create separation against such a talented Hall of Fame level corner like Pat Surtain is from a talent perspective. Again, George Pickens is still a good enough receiver to maybe beat him once, catch a play down the field. Obviously, we saw in week 1 a tough matchup for George Pickens, still produced 6 catches for 85 yards, so it's not all grim, and again, he's too talented of a player to have lower than this, but I would temper my expectations. If you have George Pickens, expect a low-end wide receiver 2 type of range of outcome rather than the prototypical, wide receiver 24, 25. He would typically be in these rankings. Wide receiver 32, we have Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars implied for 22.25 points in this game. And disclaimer right now, this may end up being the lowest I have Brian Thomas Jr. ranked across the entirety of the rest of the season, because what we saw in week 1 is a potential budding star on the surface. As Greg Rosenthal also puts here, again, he looked like the true wide receiver 1 for the Jaguars team, and he was winning at all 3 levels. Like Greg Rosenthal says, beats Jalen Ramsey, draws a 40-yard PI, draws attention so Kirk can convert a 3rd and long, and obviously, of course, beats Jalen Ramsey for that toe tap touchdown on his 3rd catch. Again, 14.7 PPR points, solid, if not, okay performance, if I would say, but for him to do that in his first game, for him to get a starting level of snaps in his first game, for him to be that 6'3", 200-pound raw wide receiver coming into the league and do that in his first game, I'm excited. I think the wheels are up for Brian Thomas Jr., and I do think this is the year of the rookie wide receiver. I mean, I think legitimately 6, 7, 8 of these guys could end up finishing as top 30 options, and Brian Thomas Jr. can very well be a top 24 option for what we saw in week 1. Wide receiver 33 for me is Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders, 22.25 implied Commanders points this week at home against the Giants. Again, very advantageous matchup. Obviously, 22.25, one of the higher implied totals we'll see from Washington throughout the year, but the thing I'm concerned about is this is a very vanilla scheme that Cliff Kingsbury is running. Again, no real motion, a lot of left alignment for Terry McLaurin in this offense. And if we continue to see Daniels either taking off or passing low ADOT options across the offense, I am concerned about Terry McLaurin's big play type of ability working with Jaden Daniels. Again, what we saw in week 1, Tampa Bay was getting after him. I understand it, but if there's their one strength on defense for the Giants, it's going to be getting after the passer with Brian Burns added this offseason, with obviously Kayvon Thibodeau in town, Dexter Lawrence in the middle. They can rush the passer. They can push the pocket. What I'm concerned about for Terry McLaurin's sake is at this point in Daniel's development, he's either a low ADOT pass dump off player or he's going to take off and run like we saw in week 1. Again, until I see evidence that he can go through his progressions, hit Terry McLaurin down the field, I'm concerned about Terry McLaurin's ceiling in fantasy. Wide receivers 34 and 36 respectively are Jaden Reed of the Green Bay Packers and Adonai Mitchell of the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, big time performance this week. Colts traveling on the road to play the Packers. Colts are actually 2.5 point road favorites in this game. And a healthy Jordan Love, again, I understand Jaden Reed would be a top 20 wide receiver. From what we saw in week 1, the explosive plays, the yards after catch ability, the straight dog he brings to the position. Like, I'm a big Jaden Reed fan, but I'm an even bigger Malik Willis hater. I think Malik Willis is flat out not an NFL caliber quarterback. So for me, I am very concerned. The fact that the Packers are implied for 19.25 points at home, if Jordan Love was in this game, they would be implied for like 26.5 points. That is a level of difference. Again, Jordan Love, an all-pro caliber quarterback, in my opinion, a potential MVP candidate level quarterback, top 10 in the league. Malik Willis, I don't view as being even an NFL caliber quarterback. So until I see this offense really produce with Malik Willis under center, I have to be docking Jaden Reed a good bit. He comes in as a wide receiver 1 on the Packers and still a guy I really love, but I want better options and better offenses at this point from what I know about Malik Willis. On the flip side with AD Mitchell, like I said with Brian Thomas, this could very well end up being the lowest I have AD Mitchell for the rest of the season. He had a very pedestrian stat line in week 1, but that's why we don't box score watch. That's why we watch the games. There were a couple other big plays, especially one in particular where Adonai Mitchell's running wide open on the sideline, and Average just missed him. Again, people might point, well, Average isn't an accurate quarterback. How can we not expect that moving forward? I think it's sooner rather than later that we do see that these two connect. And Adonai Mitchell was my wide receiver 6 in the class. So if we do see A-Rich, again, he's already looking at him. It's just unfortunate that he did miss him a couple of times. The fact that he's already getting these looks as a raw wide receiver coming in, still being that 4-3 speed threat on the outside, I do think big plays are in store for AD Mitchell moving forward. Starting this week against a Packers secondary that was absolutely flambéed by the Eagles offense in week 1. And then finally, closing off the video as my wide receiver 35, we have Demarcus Robinson of the LA Rams. Like I mentioned before, going on the road to play the Cardinals, 23.5 implied points for the Rams this week. No Puka Nacua, obviously. That's the reason why he's going to be in my top 36. But people may be questioning, is it Tyler Johnson? Is it Demarcus Robinson? And for me personally, I do view it as being Demarcus Robinson. He had more routes than Tyler Johnson, 92% of the routes versus 67% of the routes for Tyler Johnson. And we did see down the stretch in 2023, Demarcus Robinson have some big-time performances on this Rams team. Obviously, like we said, despite the loss of Puka Nacua, they're still implied for a ton of points. As long as Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay are running the show, this offense will still be potent. And Demarcus Robinson is the type of player that, while Cooper Kupp's going to be soaking everything underneath, Demarcus Robinson can really impact that third level of the field. So I do think he catches a long touchdown from Stafford in this game. But like I said at the top, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. One of two ways to access our weekly rankings manifesto, Underdog Fantasy, promo code FSE, $10+ on deposit will get you access to those on a week-to-week basis, as well as over on flockfantasy.com, promo code FSE, 30% off of any package plus a 7-day free trial if you sign up on Flock with code FSE now. Again, appreciate you guys for tuning in. Hopefully you guys can take down the W, whether you started 1-0 or 0-1. Week 2 is your week, and let's start off with getting this wide receiver position right. Take care.